Hello again, boys and girls. Well, they've just survived the river, managed not to get killed on the rapids, and now they're back on their feet again, but they're still having to make an escape from the soldiers who are following behind. So let's see what happens next. Chapter 31, The Trap. Take half the men and cover the eastern side of the river. They will have to leave it at some time. I will travel down the trail with the rest and double back up on the western side. The commander felt sure that with the entire city army mobilised, it would only be a matter of time until they encircled the fleeing group and the capture was complete. The fool hack wasn't much help. He neither knew how many were involved in the escape or of what manner of men they were. He would suffer later for his incompetence. That there were few of them was certain. What concerned him more was the forest. The soldiers were uneasy in the shifting darkness of the forest during the day, and he himself was not keen to be found in it at night. At least they were here in strength. And besides, he reminded himself, the criminals would soon be overtaken and dealt with. The princess recaptured, and then they could leave this forbidding place. Chapter 32, Trapped. We've put a mile or two between them and us, agreed Mr. Mousey. But we can't stop here, we must keep going. Now the question, and then what, was probably in more minds than Mr. Rabbit's, but no one said it, and Mr. Rabbit knew better than to doubt his friend seriously. If he hadn't trusted Mr. Mousey, he would never have left his home back in the woods to begin with. Well, you heard the mouse, he said. Got to keep going. That's what us heroes do best, eh, Mr. Mousey? The mouse didn't seem to hear and only nodded absently. If we keep to this side of the river, we can keep going until we walk right out of the forest. Well, out of the forest sounded particularly attractive to Nogger, and he was happy to walk if that was their goal. After a while they turned a corner in following the river and came to a very familiar stretch. In front of them, but now to their left, was the little stone house. Wow, said Mr. Rabbit. It took us almost 2 days going the other way. Yes, but that was uphill and without a canoe, answered Mr. Mousey. I miss that canoe, I does, said Nogger, who had been quiet for a while. So do I, said the rabbit. He does, said Nogger. I didn't think he liked her. Oh, I hated the canoe, but I miss it all right. How's that then? Because I left my rucksack on it and I'm starved. Fortunately, Mr. Mousey's rucksack had kept a fair amount of the river out, and he was able to produce the remains of his food. They had walked about a quarter of a mile now beyond the stone house, and they found some flat boulders where they rested and ate the biscuits and dried meat. Water from the river was available for drink. It is beyond me how there's any river still going. I thought I had swallowed it all, said Mr. Rabbit dryly. As they made the best of a poor meal, Mr. Mousey was studying the captain's now very damp map. I'll be back in a minute, he said, standing up. I'm just going to take a look ahead. I want to check exactly where we are. The princess looked up from her biscuit. Please be careful. Oh, don't worry about him, said the rabbit as his friend headed off. If he gets into trouble, I'll just go and rescue him. It's what us heroes do all the time, you know. Nogger nodded. He does too, princess. The princess smiled a fond smile to herself. What none of them knew was just how many miles the following Discali army had managed to close up with. The section on the far bank were only about 2 miles back now, but the group who'd come down the trail were actually further north than the small party and were now turning right towards the river. What was that? Once again, Mr. Rabbit's finely tuned hearing had picked up a noise. "Where from, Rabbity lad?" asked Nogger. Before he had time to answer, Mr. Mousey burst out of the shadows before them. "Back! Back!" he shouted between rapid breaths. "Dragons!" "Har! Now if old Nogger didn't know better, he'd have thought the young Mousey lad had said dragons," said the beaver. "After all, hadn't the dragon been sorted out? And who said anything about there being more than one?" "Run!" cried the mouse, in whose face could now be seen the urgency of his cry. "There's 3 of them!" Behind him a ripping and tearing could be heard in the trees. Smoke billowed out from the bushes. They turned and bolted flat out until they came to the little stone house once again, just as things couldn't seem to get any worse. They did. Coming over the high ground to their right were swarms of Discali soldiers. A cry went up, "There they are! After them!" An answering cry came from the far side of the river, and arrows began to fall all around them. The baying of the dogs once again froze their hearts. There was but one place left to go. "To the house!" called Mr. Mousey. Amid falling arrows and the howls of hounds and shouts of men, they tumbled through the door into the familiar room. "Now what?" Mr. Mousey asked himself. "We're trapped, and this time there's no way out." Nogger set about guarding the window, and Mr. Mousey and Mr. Rabbit locked the door by means of a wooden slat that went across the door from doorpost to doorpost. For extra security, they wedged one of the wooden chairs up against the handle. "Yep, that should give us an extra couple of seconds of life," said Mr. Rabbit. Princess Jilana stood as still as a statue, staring at the walls. "Are you all right?" asked Mr. Mousey, seeing her unflinching stare. Mr. Rabbit thought his friend was talking to him, and so he replied, "Oh, I'm fine," he said. "I mean, apart from the fact we're surrounded by hordes of rabbit-eating dogs, men with very sharp, nasty things which they would like to stick in me, and 3 crazed dragons that are probably mates of the one I poked in the eye. Apart from that, I'm just super." He was speaking in his "I am very annoyed" voice. Not annoyed at any of his friends, of course, just annoyed at the way things had turned out. He went over to the small window and shouted out through a chink in the glass, "Buzz off, you lot! Haven't you got something better to do, like shopping or walking the dogs?" It suddenly occurred to him that the dog bit would have been better left out. Mr. Mousey was beside the stationary princess. "Princess? These pictures!" she exclaimed at last. These are my father's. How did they get here?" She took a step over to the picture of the king. A tear formed on her cheek, and she turned to look at the others. Just at that moment, the door was given a tremendous kick from outside, and at the same time an arrow crashed through the glass of the window. Nogger pushed a large log up onto the windowsill for protection. "The island! We can go to the island!" cried the princess, looking at the picture of the island. "Bit late now, I'm afraid," said Mr. Rabbit, his back to the chair, wedging the door. "Nice idea, though." The princess suddenly became very agitated. No, this picture, it's my father's. It works. It's a real picture." Mr. Mousey looked oddly at the princess. It was obviously a real picture. What could she mean? The door cracked and splintered under the impact of something heavy hitting it. A rough voice shouted, "Let the dogs in at them! Let the dogs in first! Right, stand aside!" "Quickly," said the princess. "Help me take the picture off the wall." Another powerful smash hit the door as Jilana and the mouse set the picture of the island down from its place and set it flat on the floor. The door was beginning to give way, and it would only be a matter of time until it would completely cave in. Anyone watching outside would have seen the hopelessness of their position. Soldiers were arriving all the time, and swarms of them pressed around the little house. There was a flurry of activity at the front, where axes had just arrived and were about to be used to finish off smashing through the door. Nogger was losing the battle at the window as the mob outside broke down the window frame and jerked spears in through the opening. Suddenly axes began falling on the door, pulling out chunks of wood so that the feet of the soldiers outside could be seen. They were seconds from their fate. I haven't time to explain, said the princess. Just follow me. Just jump in. With that, she hopped onto the picture, lying flat on the floor, and disappeared. The commander of the army strode up to the men at the door. Dogs were straining at their leads and snarling to get in at the door. "Now," he said grimly, "finish the door and send in the hounds." A rhyme went through the incredulous mind of the little mouse. When all seems lost and hope is dim, leave doubts and fears and just jump in. Nogger and Mr. Rabbit just stood looking open-mouthed at where the princess had last been. Mr. Mousey grabbed Nogger. "Just jump in," he shouted, and Nogger found himself pushed onto the picture. Nogger disappeared. "Come on, Mr. Rabbit, you now." "But did you see? Where did..." The door burst open, sending splinters of wood, followed by a sudden, horrifying set of howls. "No time!" Mr. Mousey grabbed his friend roughly and half lifted him off the floor as he fell onto the picture. A split second later, two snarling, tearing brutes flew into the room. Oh, we'll stop there. What's happening? Jilana, then Nogger just disappeared onto the pic. Well, we'll need to read the next chapter to find out what's happening. That's chapter 33. Well, anyway, this is all very exciting. So what's happening next? Well, you'll need to listen to that chapter coming up next. So thank you for listening to these couple of little chapters, and go on to YouTube and go for chapter 33 to see what happens next. Thanks, boys and girls. You take care, and God bless.